From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
Welcome back to From the Void for part 2 of our 2-part series on Amelia Earhart with author and podcast host Chris Williamson. If you missed part 1, hit pause and go back to listen to the first part first. If you've already heard part 1, then you are in the right place. Without further ado, here's the second half of my interview with Chris Williamson on the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. Yeah, so
I'm sorry. These answers are super long, and I'm sorry.
No, this is great. This is good stuff.
It's hard to cram 85 years into like an hour conversation. So I'm trying to give you guys as much verbal diarrhea as I can for your listenership to go in there and maybe they want to do their own research and
no, this is great.
Yeah.
And for way more detail, I recommend everybody go check out your podcast, Vanished, and check out, because you guys go way more into depth and tell way more of the historical background. It is absolutely fascinating. So obviously we can't get nearly into this detail here, but
it's fascinating, but also maybe sad a little bit too. Like we go into it and it's like we go through an awful lot. If you like really just disgustingly horrible long dives on like really a lot of the historical detail and why stuff matters and why it applies to rule of law and stuff, you'll love our show. You'll eat up every second of our show. I realize it's not for everybody, but it's one of those shows that really we take serious deep dives, and we're very proud of that. So yeah, it's a lot.
As a history nerd myself, I appreciate the thoroughness of the great links you went to research, and it lends to the credibility of your show. So I appreciate it from my perspective.
Thank you.
So, yeah,
I appreciate that. That means a lot. Thank you.
Absolutely. So far, all right. So those are the facts as we have them. The last moments we have on record. So obviously, there's probably a search and rescue that takes place shortly after this. And my first thought, as you were talking about the signal strength and the fact that they could hear her at least, my first thought is, okay, so what is the reach of communications in those days? Because at least that gives you sort of a general idea of where she may have been.
Yeah, you think so?
What? Yeah. So what's the first move here? What do they do when they realize that she's not coming through the clouds? She's not landing.
Yeah, they all go to Howland. Basically, they all come to them. They know they're listening to what Earhart said. At this point, they've got the call logs. Everything starts unfolding pretty quickly. It gets to once it hits the press, there's no containing it. She's lost in the middle of the Pacific. There's so many famous headlines. If you Google search Amelia Earhart newspapers, it's fascinating, some of the stuff that you'll find. And it's all over the world, right? So there's no containing it. She's out there somewhere, her and Noonan, and they don't know what happened to them. Their best guess is basically what I just told you. Under 200 miles in and around that area. Theory abounds almost immediately after really the search ends and it doesn't turn up anything. They're spending millions of dollars in the middle of the Great Depression every day to search for her. And the search eventually gets called off because they don't find, there's no oil slick, there's no wreckage, there's nothing on the water. Obviously, they're not going to be able to search, 18,000 feet below the surface of the ocean at that point, at that time. And so they start as a precaution. They start searching a lot of islands in the area. They start searching not just that exact spot, but they try to cast as wide a net as they can. And individual searches continue. After that, George Putnam did not give up for quite some time after that. He kept searching, and that gets really interesting as far as some of the stuff he was considering, as far as some of the outcomes of what may have happened to his wife. But yeah, they basically search for a short but intense amount of time, and they call off the search with no results, obviously. And she's declared dead in absentia on January the 5th, 1939. She disappears on July 2nd, 1937, just shy of her 39th birthday or 40th birthday, maybe. I'm not sure now. It's all starting to meld together. But around that time, and then she's declared dead in absentia on January 5th of 39. And that's when we kicked off the show, January 5th, a few years ago, and then we ended it on January 5th. So I'm big on anniversary dates. It's a big deal to me. But yeah, she was searched intensely for, and as you can imagine now, she's still being searched intensely for. There are multiple active investigations right now on behind the scenes on Amelia Earhart and all different parts of the world, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it feels like every few years or so there's a TV show or something that pops up that claims that maybe we found some evidence and maybe it's suggesting that such and such happened. So in your research and in your opinion, what are the most probable theories behind what happened?
Oh, man, that's a loaded question, man. That's a very loaded question. So you're asking really someone who's, I try to stay as general as I can on this. I have things that I like about every one of the theories I'm about to lay out. So let me just preface that for all the Earhart people that might latch onto this and hear this. I swear I like all of them. But let's start with theory number one, which we've kind of already talked about. That's something called crash and sink or ditch and sink. There's variations of it. Essentially, that theory adheres to the official story of the United States government, that the Electra, really a plane that's 39.5 foot long and 55 foot wingspan, lies somewhere around 18,000 feet below the surface of the water in an area roughly the size of Texas. So that's what you're looking for. That's what you're dealing with. Okay. The Titanic, 800 feet or 900 feet or something in comparison. So that's what you're looking at. And they believe that she's there. An awful lot of scientific and mathematical and celestial navigation work has gone into that theory. It's very technical. A lot of people have taken a lot of different shots at the ocean in areas that they feel the plane should be in, or they theorize the plane should be in. Everyone struck out. So these are the best of the best too. These aren't like slouches. These are the smartest people in the world that are taking these shots, these educated guesses based off of a lot of work. And so far, nobody's turned up anything. That's crash and sink. Okay. Now that puts her, the way I like to do this is really by geographical location and how far away from ground zero she is. And we're going to call Howland Island ground zero because that's where she was supposed to go, according to the U.S. government and according to the story, right? So that's theory one. Theory two takes her about 400-ish miles away from that point to a little island called Nikomororo. And that's an island that's widely been searched. It's known as the castaway theory. The idea that behind this is that not being able to find Howland, they head north, they head to Nikomororo, and they sort of stumble upon it. And there is this atoll on Nikomororo that they feel comfortable, or at least Earhart feels comfortable enough with landing on. And she lands successfully. We think it's probably a rough landing, but she lands. It's not a crash or anything like that. And she's able to successfully, depending on who you talk to, send out radio distress calls over the course of the next several days in accordance with high tide and low tide at Nikomororo. Now, the only way she can do that is when the engines that run the radio and run the plane are not underwater. So obviously at high tide, the calls stop. At low tide, they begin again. And we have this coordination that happens over the course of several days. A lot of people pick it up. They've also combed that island. We could go on for the entire rest of the show about this. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence. They found bones there. They found a campsite there. So I'm making this sound very, very positive. And it is, because they put a lot of work into it. But I will also tell you that was a highly trafficked island. And it was searched over and it was covered. And they've had 13 or 14 expeditions to that island for the last 30 plus years. And they've got a lot of great circumstantial evidence, but they haven't turned up anything concrete. Again, according to who you talk to, some people believe that is it and that they've proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. We happen to take the opinion that, well, not so fast. on that. And that's Castaway. That's the idea. Now, again, that's a very big oversimplification of a lot of these theories, but this will get you guys started for listeners that want to sort of go down the rabbit hole and pick a theory and start seeing more of what I'm talking about. So that's theory number 2. And we got 3 more at least.
Okay.
So,
what's interesting about that one too is you mentioned that it's a highly trafficked area, which would lead you to believe that at some point, if they were able to survive long enough, that somebody is going to come and rescue them, right? Like that they're not just going to stay put.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. They set like Jen says in the show, set those trees on fire or something. If I'm Earhart, we don't know what happened to Noonan in this instance. It's speculated that Noonan might have had a fatal head injury that he suffered on landing and maybe never made it out of the plane. Earhart is like just over 100 pounds wet. I mean, she's probably not able to drag Noonan out of a plane if she has to. I don't know what the scenario would have been. But yeah, the idea that she died alone on that island, probably by herself for, days, weeks, months, we don't know. That's a pretty horrible way to have to die. And to frantically send out distress calls if it was a matter of them not being able to see her or not arriving at the right time or in enough time, all that speculation. But yeah, it's, you would imagine that somebody would somebody would pop over that island at some point, but maybe she was just, they just missed each other. It's very possible.
Yeah. Oh gosh. All right.
Yeah.
So what's theory number 3?
All right. So theory, you're really giving me a workout today. So theory number 3 is probably the biggest theory of all of them when it comes to just sheer size and just sheer data. And that is something known as the Japanese capture hypothesis or theory.
Yes.
And this is one that, it goes every which way you can possibly think. If you thought it can go there, it probably has gone there at some point. It's the most fantastical of all of them. It kind of reads and runs like a Hollywood movie. And it actually was at one point. Was it Rosalind Russell and was it not Flight of the Phoenix? I'll have to look it up, but there was a movie about it that there's rumor that George Putnam Ghost wrote it and all this crazy stuff. And, so you just take that how you'd like, but essentially in a nutshell, the idea is that Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan happened upon the Gilberts in the Marshall Islands. And this puts them now about 800 miles away from ground zero. So again, could she have made it there? There's a lot of reports that say she could have made it there on that plane, on that flight with that fuel. And there's of course a lot of people that say that she couldn't. So the idea here, just for sake of going with the theory, is that she happens upon the Japanese, she gets into custody, and she's either shot down or she has to put the plane down and they grab her shortly after that. What really leads a lot of weight to this particular theory is there are over 200 different eyewitness accounts throughout Saipan and the Marshall Islands of people that came into contact with Amelia Earhart, Fred Noonan, or their Lockheed Electra, or a combination of those 3. So you have eyewitness testimony all the way from local Marshallese and locals there that were on site at the time that saw her come down or witnessed them, parading her out or taking her into custody or whatever. And you have that going all the way to post World War II and post-war military that was stationed in that area that came in contact with different items supposedly that may have belonged to Amelia Earhart. And then that goes all the way up to Admiral Chester Nimitz, he's got an entire fleet of ships named after him right now. So, it goes up to the highest branches of the U.S. government. And the idea that she was caught, captured, and kept for a certain amount of time and either died in Japanese custody, or it ties into another really fun sort of little alleyway in a little bit with another theory. But the idea is that she's caught, captured, and kept for a certain amount of time, and she either dies of dysentery in a jail cell alone, or she gets executed and she gets kicked into a shallow grave somewhere, and her remains, and Noonan's remains for that matter, are somewhere in the Marshall Islands or Saipan. And again, it's kind of like the ocean site, right? There's different people who have gone out there and taken different cracks at different spots that they feel that, okay, if we dig down, there's a good chance we're going to find remains or something. And depending on who you talk to, and we got some stuff coming out right now with some of the people that were involved in those investigations. They either found nothing or they found something that, they maybe confirmation bias might tie it to their theory, or it might be legitimate. So we're kind of unfolding all that as we speak. So again, very oversimplified, massively oversimplified, but that's Japanese capture in a nutshell. And that lies a lot of that really leans heavily into eyewitness testimony. If you look at sort of a lot of this theory and a lot of these different ways you can go, it's different types of testimony that are propping them up. Crash and sink is official government story, and it's got those call logs, right? So you got some physical information. Castaway's got a lot of circumstantial, information. People get put away for murder on circumstantial, information all the time. And then you got Japanese capture. It leans heavily on eyewitness testimony. That's another area of defense or, proving a case. So it's interesting how all these different things, sort of tie into overall, presentation. And that's kind of where the show came in is if you're sitting in a jury box and you're listening to me talk about all this and you're listening to all these experts talk about all this, can I sell you on the idea that she was in custody of the Japanese? Or can I sell you on the idea that she crashed and sank or that she was a castaway? That's what the show's all about.
Yeah, what's interesting about that last theory, too, is that over the years I remember years back where allegedly there was a photograph of the back of, I think, Amelia sitting on a pier or something, and Fred Noonan's off to the side. And I think that was later, very quickly after that, after it was scrutinized, debunked. But you'd think that all those witnesses, that there would be some sort of more concrete evidence.
This case has an evidence problem. Absolutely. I'm working through DB Cooper right now for my second book. That case has a massive evidence problem. That's partly why these cases are still unsolved, I believe. It's one of those Japanese capture, especially. There's so many incredible, if they're true, but frustrating stories, in that particular theory. According to a lot of the witnesses and according to a lot of the people that came into contact with Earhart in some way, shape, or form or whatever, there were physical artifacts that were in play. One I'll mention, and there's more, and they're all in the book and in the show, and you can research them on your own, of course. But there's a briefcase that ties into Amelia Earhart that was discovered by a gentleman by the name of Robert Wallach, who was there in post-war. And he came across the briefcase one day. They were going through basically the ruins of a city that had been blown to shit, basically. And they were going through and looking at all these different rooms and all these different buildings. And in one of the buildings was a safe. And they actually happened to have a demo expert with them. And so, of course, they do what anybody would do. They blow the hell out of that safe. They blow the doors off that safe. And in that safe is a briefcase. And Wallach grabs a briefcase and he runs off and he's like, I'm going to be a rich Marine. It's going to be full of yen, or it's going to be full of something that's really going to be great. And we're going to be set for life. Well, he gets to where he can open it. He opens it. And he's looking through it, and it's like Amelia Earhart's passports and her paperwork and all her personal, intimate information she would fly with, like her personal briefcase. And he looks at it, and he's like, Wait, what's going on? What's all this? Like, they told us she drowned in the ocean. This stuff's bone dry. What's going on here? And so he takes the briefcase and I guess consults his buddies, and they all tell him, you got to turn it in. You got to turn the briefcase in because that's the kind of men they were. They were honorable men, and it was spoils of war, right? You're going to go through a process. So he goes and he finds an officer that's on the beach somewhere there, or somewhere local to them, and they can tell because they had like these. They call them the scrambled eggs on the hat, right? So they knew they were officers, right? And he tells him what he's got. He says, "I've got this briefcase, and look at it. Look at this. It's like Amelia Earhart's paperwork." And the guy takes it, follows procedure, and he writes him a receipt. He actually writes him a receipt that says Amelia Earhart's paperwork and passports and everything in a briefcase. Like, he tells him very clearly what it is. So Wallach takes a receipt, sticks it in his money belt that he has strapped to his person at all times. Well, later in battle, or later down the line, he gets wounded. And it's a pretty bad wound. And in order for them to dress the wound, they have to cut away all of his stuff. And Wallach actually, while they're doing this, is saying, save the money belt, like save the money belt, because he knows he's got this holy grail supposedly in there, right? Well, of course they don't save the money belt. So it's gone. So now we have no idea that this briefcase ever existed. We have his story, which I tend to believe, because these guys had no reason to lie. He never became rich. He didn't sell his story. He told the story to a bunch of people. It was the same story every time. And he didn't have anything to gain by it other than just telling his story. And same thing with all the military and really all the locals for that matter. They always maintained, for the most part, everybody across the board maintained their stories. And so that's just one example of probably over a dozen. The Nicomoro bones and the whole saga with that and the mishandling of that was just absolutely terrible. And we don't have that either. So, out there might exist some holy grails of aviation. So to go back all the way back to your point, and again, I'm so sorry for taking this long to.
No, you're fine.
But to get back to your point, Les Kinney finds this picture in the National Archives, and he doesn't think anything of it at first. And it's only when he takes a second look at it, and he calls his wife over, and he says, "Look at this," and she goes, "Holy shit." That's definitely Amelia Earhart. Like he's not looking at like a digital. He's got his massive blow. I mean, he's got a really good version of it to look at. Obviously, he's got the original piece, right? So he's floored because there's nobody on the face of the earth that knows more about Earhart than Les Kinney. He could stomp on me, and I'm nothing compared to this guy, right? He's a walking Earhart encyclopedia / Bible / dictionary / whatever. And so he's, it's like it finds its way into the hands of like the right guy, right, to do this. And they do this History Channel thing, and this debunker, this blogger comes out and supposedly debunks it, and that throws a big wet blanket on everything. And it's really hard, and I felt really bad for Les. I really truly feel like that picture is very powerful and very compelling, and he's done the work on that since then. And I would never speak on his behalf, but I think you haven't heard the last from him and from the idea that they were captured by the Japanese. It's there. It's dominant. And you have to, again, it's like another one I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But it's like, you have to deal with that at some point. You have to explain a lot of that away. And that's awfully hard to do. It's awfully compelling. So yeah, that's Japanese capture in a very ridiculous nutshell.
That's a strong one, though. I feel like that's a strong one.
Yeah.
So especially we were talking about the number of potential witnesses. It's one thing to say, oh, one or two people think they may have seen, these two individuals walking around. It's another thing to have. Like I think you said 1 to 200,
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lot of potential witnesses, and they can't all be
right.
wrong.
Right. Absolutely. If I kill you in the middle of 200 people, or you kill me in the middle of 200 people, that's the question that launched the show. I reached out to Jen cold, and I just said, look, discovered she was an attorney. We started talking offline, and I just asked her, like, look, hypothetically, if I'm a prosecutor, and I'm accusing your client of murdering somebody, and I've got 200 eyewitnesses, do you have a chance in hell at that? Can you poke holes in that? How does that process work? Walk me through it. And that's really literally what birthed the entire show and everything we've done since then, was that one question. So
that's amazing.
It's a compelling question. Everybody would have very, dramatic answers to it. Likely they have their own, thoughts and opinions on it. And, yeah, I mean, that's a hard one, but you have to answer it.
Yeah. So, all right. So do you have a stronger one that you said you had another one? Do you have a stronger one than that? Yeah. That one's pretty compelling. I'm feeling pretty good about that one.
Yeah, they're all strong, right? It's like those like a Forrest from Astonishing Legends always says this, and I stole it from him, frankly. But it's like he says, oh, it's like these people that test new cars. They get in this new car and like, oh God, this car's got everything. It's the best car ever. And then they get the next car they test drive the next week and like, oh, this car's got everything. It's the best car ever. So it's like that. You're going to experience that over and over. The next one has got something. So we've got eyewitness testimony. We've got all that stuff. The one thing we don't have right now is physical evidence. We talked about how frustrating that is. Well, the next one has not only a piece of physical evidence, but actually has an aircraft tied to the end of the theory of the idea, right? And that's the Buka hypothesis, the Buka theory, the idea that the turnaround and go back theory, or, there's a lot of different ways it's been named, but I will call it the Buka hypothesis, of course, out of respect for Bill Snavely, who founded it and ran with it. The theory is, and again, in a very, very big nutshell here, that the theory ties a lot into something called flight radius. Flight radius basically is how far can you get on half a tank of gas? That's really what it is, right? He ties into the fuel, the time, the distance, and all that stuff, and he tries to make his mathematical calculations fit, and so far it fits pretty nicely. It fits pretty tightly. The idea is that basically, as Bill explains it, roughly halfway through the flight from Leh to Howland Island lies Buka. Okay, it's this area. It's roughly the halfway point of the flight, and it's on an area that was never searched by anybody on the search we talked about earlier. So it's like in an area that's kind of outside. And he theorizes that they faced unanticipated headwinds that burned a lot more fuel than anticipated. They were burning fuel at a rate that was higher than they could even have imagined. And because of that, they made an executive decision to turn around and try to land at the nearest runway. They had passed Buka. It wasn't that far back, but they could turn around and they could land safely and regroup, essentially. So like on the surface, it sounds like, oh, that's a logical thing a pilot might do in that situation. Well, they actually encounter some really bad weather over Buka, over that area. And we know that there's some speculation that it was pretty, Leo Bellart said it was pretty cloudless above Howland Island where the Itasca was at. So I'm going to take Leo Bellart at his word. And he says, some clouds, but nothing crazy. Over Buka, we know there was weather patterns. So we know there was weather at that time, and at that time period she was there. So she encounters really rough weather, and she actually ends up getting struck by lightning. And it seems kind of a little crazy, but it happens. So the left engine gets struck by lightning, and she falls out of the sky. And the reason why she can't communicate with the Itasca is because she is actually on a nighttime frequency at Buka, and they are in a daytime frequency where they're at Howland. So they're on different frequencies, okay? And she's not switching back and forth for some reason, and that frustrated the Itasca. But in this instance, again, if we're going with the theory, she gets struck by lightning. They fall out of the sky. There's actually a lone witness to this theory, and he happens to be a little boy at the time, okay? And he's standing on the beach at Buka, and this plane comes out of the heavens, and he thinks it's like the second coming of Christ. He's never seen anything like this before, right? So he sees it fall out of the sky. It hits, and he thinks he sees them fiddling with radios or doing something in the aircraft, but he doesn't stick around long enough to find out. He takes off and runs back to the village and starts telling all of the elders. Well, nobody believes him. They all call him a liar. So nobody goes out to investigate this. They don't know. Right. And this happens to be, if we're looking at crash and sink at near Howland, you're looking at 18,000 feet. This is the exact opposite of that. This sits in less than 150 feet of water. So it's really low, but we'll get to kind of where the catch is in a minute. So she hits the water. They sink immediately. Apparently they never make it out of the plane. We don't know that part of the story. But years later, you fast forward till like the early mid 90s, I think. And at Buka, they free dive for everything. They can free dive to like 100 feet. It's pretty remarkable, right? And this guy is out there, this local, and he's free diving for, I think, sea cucumbers or something like that. And he sees this aircraft. He sees this wreckage, and it's right in the spot, for the most part, that the boys said it would be in all those years later. Only this time, it's covered in some coral, and it's there. You can make out certain characteristics, but it's covered in some coral. And they don't know kind of how it got there, right? So you fast forward to Bill Snavely. He gets there. He's around that area doing some sightseeing, and he's looking for Earhart's plane, right? And he happens to just tell a couple of locals there that he's looking for Earhart's plane. And they take him to somebody who says, oh, I know where there's an aircraft. We don't know where it came from. We don't know the origin of it, but I know where it's at. What are you looking for? He tells him a little bit about what he's looking for. He gives him some characteristics, and he says, I will, I'll reach out to you in a month or so and let you know, what happens, what we find. Okay. So he doesn't think anything of it. He goes back home. They email him a while, down the line, he gets an email and he goes, oh yeah, we checked out that aircraft. And I think he'd given him like 8 or 10 different maybe 5 characteristics. I don't remember at this point, multiple characteristics. He goes, yeah, how many of them how close are we? And he goes, all of them. They all match. Okay. So he sits up and he's like, okay, something's weird here, right? So he doesn't know at this point, even if they're just sort of pulling his leg, egging him on, he still does. So he's very cautious, and he goes forward very cautious, and he works on it for like 13 or 14 years. He writes a book called Tracking Amelia Earhart, Her Flight Path to the End. A good friend of mine, Doug Westfall, released it. Paragon Agency, that's where you can go get it. And he talks about this story and tells his whole story. And there's some really, really kind of interesting stuff in it. But he's got this aircraft, and they've gone out there since then, Project Blue Angel, a couple of times. I've seen some of the underwater ROV video. It's stunning. It's really beautiful. But the problem they're facing is that this thing has since really degraded quality-wise, and it's wrapped in you're looking at the ghost of an airframe. It's wrapped in a coral shell that's about 3 to 4 feet thick in a lot of areas. It's really, you can barely tell it's an aircraft, but the people who have been down there professionally all say without a doubt it's 1,000% it's an aircraft, and it's there. It's twin engine, it's twin tailed. We've confirmed it's not a military aircraft. There's you could make a lot of use cases for there being a military aircraft or it being a Japanese Zero or something like that. He's walked all of that back before he even brought Earhart into the picture. He basically kind of reverse engineered this idea and said, it's not Earhart, it's not Earhart, it's not Earhart. What else could it be? And he is basically ruled out everything he can other than it being not just a plane, but the plane. So the story I've just told you, is it true? We don't know, but they're going out there to try to determine whether or not that's it. And if it's it's checkmate. I mean, it's obviously over at that point, and he's got the aircraft there. Now, this thing could take a really crazy twist, and they could discover that it is a Lockheed Electra 10E, but it's not her Lockheed Electra 10E. And if that happens, then you could tie the whole idea back to them being a spy and there being multiple planes and this whole thing being more nefarious than it actually was. And again, that's like a whole other conversation. So this is all just like real tip of the iceberg stuff. But that is Buka, and that's theory number 4.
Wow.
So there you go.
That's fascinating, because it says to me that even if we don't have the technology now necessarily to prove, or run whatever sort of testing that we might need to run, which, by the way, as soon as you mentioned, the degradation of the plane, it immediately made me think of the frustration of shipwrecks in the ocean versus like the Great Lakes, where saltwater just, these things deteriorate over time.
Just eats it up.
Time is of the essence. Yeah.
Yeah. It's sad. And, if you read through the book, or if you listen to the show, we talk to people that were down there, and these are people that are very highly respected. They went down there, donated their time. They're on a shoestring budget. They're trying to determine, hey, is there a cause enough here for alarm? Snavely even himself has said, look, all day, I'll say it's consistent with the plane she flew, but I can't tell you that it's hers. I'm not going to tell you that. And he goes, what I love about Snavely's approach is it's fresh. He says repeatedly, if I'm wrong, I'll happily admit that I'm wrong. If they pull that plane out of the water off the coast of Howland Island tomorrow, I'll happily shake their hand and say, hey, I was wrong. But he's not wrong yet. And I think, and that's the elephant in the room that nobody mentions. You have to go out there and deal with it. They did this documentary with Bob Ballard, Nat Geo. They pulled out all the stops, gorgeously shot documentary they did a few years ago. He went out to Nicomaroro, and then he went on this tour after and said, look, I know where it's not here. We would have found it. You could easily take those resources out to Buka and knock this out real quick. And you could also do that with a couple of other spots all over the world for some really interesting theory. And since nobody's brought anything to the table that's, definitive yet, and all we have is what we had on July 3rd, 1937, why not? All of it should be, all of it should be looked at. All of it should be inclusive, all of it. And that's sort of the one area that people will argue with me on, and they're wrong. I mean, it really, really needs to be inclusive at this point. 85 years and we've got nothing. So there it is.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it's amazing. So any other theories that you want to mention
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, we could go all night. I mean, I won't talk too much about it. There's other theories. There's an idea that she was repatriated back to the United States. That's a really juicy one. That's a really fun one. I'll just sort of dangle that one out there for your listeners, and they can go Google search Amelia Earhart, Irene Bolam. You're welcome. Have fun with that one. That is an insane, fun, exciting, crazy theory, and I eat it up. I love it. I think that's where we started. I thought that was the most fun. Let's go with the most far-fetched. Okay, let's start there. And I think, there's a lot of really great people that did a lot of great work on that and are continuing to do a lot of great work on that. So check that out. And there's like maybe honestly like a half a dozen more. I can tell you that before the year is out, another theory will take a giant step into the spotlight that will come out of nowhere that has been around for a long time that we have not even mentioned tonight. And I'll just leave that there for people to sort of like discover that, and hopefully before the end of the year, you'll get something really cool.
That's awesome. So, I love that.
Yeah.
No, I love the Irene theory. I remember listening to that episode, and what was intriguing about that one and really fun about it, it's almost as if, even if she was not Amelia Earhart, I believe if I remember correctly, they were like, okay, all right, then take a DNA test. And she's like, no.
Yeah.
Like, you can prove them wrong right now. And you're like, nah, I'm just going to let that one sit.
Yeah, we discussed that too on the show. Jen's got some strong opinions on that. And I definitely agree with a lot of what she talks about. Does that mean she was Earhart? Absolutely not. It could mean she was a very private citizen and very much so valued her privacy. That's really all it could have been. But it is interesting, the timing of that decision. They settle out of court almost ceremoniously. And this is McGraw-Hill. This is a book that was published on a massive platform. If you guys look up McGraw-Hill now, it's still one of the biggest publishers in the world. They went to bat on this, and she got what she wanted ultimately at the end. She got the book pulled. She got her name cleared. Maybe. Her name is sort of associated with this really crazy idea and this really the funnest part of the whole story. But was it just because she didn't want to reveal that she actually was full of shit and was Earhart the whole time? Maybe. I mean, maybe, sure. If not, it could have been, she was married to a retired MI6 or a former MI6 agent. She might have been in bed with some government secrets that had nothing to do with Amelia Earhart. And, giving her prints would have revealed that part of her life. And it really just has nothing to do with Earhart. She was right all along. So, I'm down for either one. You look at the evidence and you tell me, was Irene Bolam, Amelia Earhart, were they one and the same? Were they in on a spy mission together? Was Earhart never the spy? Was Earhart the decoy? And was she involved? You could go all kinds of different ways with it. And, it's a lot of fun. The case is a lot of fun to go into. And when you consider what we talked about in the first half of this show, building up sort of who this woman was at the time she disappeared, it becomes even more. This is not DB Cooper. This is not Jack the Ripper. This is a woman who is an icon. There's an Amelia Earhart Day at NASA. There's a reason for that. Her statue was just unveiled at the Capitol. It's this, from Atchison, Kansas, and they did a wonderful job with that. There's a reason why, I say this in every podcast I ever do, but there's a reason why little girls and boys, children of all ages, will write to her house where she grew up in Atchison, Kansas, every day. There's current letters that show up every day. That's power you can't buy. That's amazing. She's got an iconic image, and she's still reaching. Her reach is arguably one of the biggest ever, and it's still reaching out to people now, which is pretty, freaking amazing when you think about, how we don't know how she ended. And I haven't really talked about it. I usually do, but Fred Noonan, her celestial navigator on that flight, there was a second person on that flight, and he was the guy you'd want to have on board a flight like that. He was the best in the world. This is the guy that literally wrote the book for Pan Am. So, he wasn't any, it was old hat for him. This was just, okay, another job. And he respected Earhart, and they might have fought and they might have had issues, but they respected each other's talents and abilities at the end of the day. And he could have stayed off the flight when everybody else exited, but he kept on with her. And if they died in Japanese custody, he met a particularly gruesome death himself, depending on who you believe in that theory. So I would say that Fred Noonan and Earhart, they're icons. Are they maybe the first casualties of World War II? That's a possibility. If that's discovered, should they be honored as such? Absolutely, they should be. So you could take this story anywhere you want. It really is a choose your own adventure story. It's got something for everybody. And you can get into this and you can be inspired and you can be frustrated and you can be excited and you can be all these different things. And I think a lot of cases out there, like DB Cooper and Jack the Ripper and all this stuff, they have that same kind of appeal for the audience that are involved in those cases. But I think Earhart goes beyond. I think you got DB Cooper and you got all this different stuff, and then you've got Earhart that's above it. I think if this plane is found tomorrow, and again, I say this all the time, but it's true. It's the Holy Grail. It really is the Holy Grail. If it was discovered tomorrow, this would be bigger than the Titanic. It would be bigger than all that stuff, because it's the biggest question mark in U.S. history, certainly, in my opinion. That might be a bold statement, but it's you got JFK and you got some other bunch of other stuff. I acknowledge all that, but I'm saying that this is really coup de grace here with Earhart. This would be a big one if we found out what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, I think there is space to hold both things at the same time. The just intrigue of the mystery of what happened to her, and also acknowledge the fact that without her, aviation in general wouldn't be where it is. And it certainly, she propelled, women in aviation on a level that probably would not have happened had she not existed. So, there's, you don't want the one to overshadow the other, specifically her accomplishments. You don't want to be overshadowed necessarily by the tragedy that is her disappearance. But I think you have to kind of hold both,
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Very true. It's the legacy and the disappearance. I always say it, legacy over everything. Absolutely. It trumps everything. The legacy is what's important here. The disappearance keeps her relevant, keeps her in the news. Sure, it's exciting. There's a whole other side to it. But, people really should be focusing on the kind of woman she was and the legacy that she left. And it's remarkable. And it's one of those stories that will stand the test of time. I think Earhart and Noonan, their story and their legacies respectively stand the test of time. And what I do and so many other people do on this case is really proof of that, I think. And, it'll be one of those stories, as long as there's a question mark at the end of that sentence and not a period, it will always be a story that people will talk about. We'll be destined to do this forever.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming. This is fascinating. I got to get you to come back on. We got to talk about John Wilkes Booth. You got my attention with that.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating one that not a lot of people know. That one, the kind of the mystery, at the end of, maybe of his life.
Maybe. Yeah. It's wild. I'm sure Jen Taylor, if you're listening to this, she would love to come on and talk about that. That was such a fun experience. And it's really like the crux, the meat and potatoes of the show. I bring this really crazy ass conspiracy theory, to Jennifer's lap essentially. And she has to deal with it and respond. And I think she did an amazing job in that series with Dave Taylor, who is now her husband, which is really awesome. They did a fantastic job of defending history as it's written. And that's just one of the cases we cover for the show. DB Cooper was a big one. Jen wasn't involved in that one. She was super busy at the time. So I did that one on my own. And that's my second book that's coming out in just over a couple of months on Thanksgiving Eve. Again, I love anniversaries. So, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So DB Cooper.
So go out and get the current book, Rabbit Hole: The Vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan.
Yes.
Also check out the podcast, Vanished. It's excellent and goes into way more detail, so go check it out. For the listeners out there, where can they stay up on top of what you're up to and get a copy of the new book even?
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. Yeah, intotherabbithole.net is where you can go to get the book if you want a signed copy, or just a regular copy. You don't have to sign it, but you can also get it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble as well. I'm really pushing to try to get it into brick and mortar stores especially indies. I really love independent bookstores. And then we're also working on the Kindle version for people who wonder about that. Not yet. The book is 800 plus pages in print, so it's going to be a huge, Kindle book. We're working on formatting. And then you can get us at vanishedshow.com. And we're on every major podcast platform. Season 3 with our first episode in our Judge Crater series just kicked off a couple of nights ago, as I mentioned at the top of the show. And you can also look for Chasing Earhart. We just returned last night. And we have a new maybe 6-pack or 10-pack episodes on Chasing Earhart that's going to be really spectacular that are coming out. So all of this is sort of unfolding. And of course, the new book is called Take the Money and Run, The Vanishing of D.B. Cooper. And that will be out on Thanksgiving Eve, too, in the same places. So, yeah. A lot on the plate.
Can't wait. Yeah, I'm excited to listen to the new episodes. Like I said, the detail in it is the history nerd in me gets very, very excited about that because I love going down the rabbit hole and getting into the weeds. So I love it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. Definitely have to have you back on, and we'll talk some more about some of the other fascinating mysteries out there.
Anytime, fellow Williamson. I appreciate this. Thanks, John.
Thanks a lot. What happened to Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan on the final leg of their flight? Was Amelia an undercover spy for the government? Did the plane just run out of gas and crash into the ocean? Were they able to land on another island? Historians and amateur detectives have searched for answers for decades, and one of the most famous mysteries of all time. What happened to Amelia Earhart? Hopefully, there's a discovery out there waiting to be made to finally answer this question once and for all. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like this episode or any of the prior episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review. And please tell a friend. And we'll be back next week with an all-new mystery. Thanks for listening to From the Void.